Welcome to 18 Birdies Golf 101. This is the most important golf lesson I've ever learned. How the golf club is designed to work dictates how we have to use it. And I know that seems obvious, but when surveyed, nearly all golfers didn't understand fully how the golf club was designed to work. The most critical piece of the entire club design is the sweet spot. And once you know where it is, you can start building your entire setup and eventually your entire swing. Let's start with pitching wedge. The sweet spot on the pitching wedge is between the 4th and 5th groove and in the center horizontally on the club face. So how does the sweet spot affect your setup and your swing with a pitching wedge? Due to the fact that your pitching wedge has somewhere between 42 and 46 degrees of loft, in order to touch the sweet spot with your club, the face has to be leaning toward the target just enough so that the back of the ball can touch the exact sweet spot of the club. A great way to figure out what that looks like is you could put a little dot on the face between the 4th and 5th grooves in the horizontal center of the club, and that will allow you to align the sweet spot to the ball in your setup. So how does this affect your setup and your swing? First of all, the need to be in that impact alignment that allows the sweet spot to touch the back of the ball affects the way the club looks at the impact position. That also affects how the club is traveling through impact. When I lean the club forward to allow the sweet spot of the face to touch the back of the ball, that changes the angle of attack of my wedge. Because the handle is leaning in this position, the club head hasn't reached its lowest point of the arc yet. And that just means that the club is going to strike the ball and continue downward after the strike into the turf. And that's how you create a divot, and that's why all of the best players take a divot with their wedges. This alignment at impact also has an effect on our ball flight. Because the club needs to be leaning forward at impact, yes, it affects the club's downward angle of attack through the strike, but that also has an impact on our club's path. Because the handle's forward and the low point of the swing is now forward, so how does that affect our ball flight? First, because the club's leaning forward and the face is now touching the back of the ball right on the sweet spot, that does affect the downward angle of attack, but it also affects the outward angle of attack, pushing your club head's path through impact in to out. Have you ever heard that the best players curve the ball from right to left? That's most true when we have lofted clubs, and that's because the need to move the face forward and the shaft forward moves the low point forward, and it moves the club path in to out. And with that club traveling in to out relative to the target line, we're putting right to left spin on the ball. That right to left spin will eventually be a draw when we see our shot fly. Okay, now let's talk about the 7-iron. Your 7-iron has considerably less loft than your pitching wedge. So the amount of forward lean that your face and the shaft has to have is a little bit less. It still does need to lean forward slightly in order for you to hit the sweet spot. So as we lean that face forward, that moves the bottom of the arc toward the target. So we'll be striking the ball on the downswing slightly, and we'll also still be swinging slightly in to out with our 7-iron. So a really well struck 7-iron will also have a slight draw. Moving on to the 5-iron. The 5-iron does have less loft than the 7-iron, but it still has enough loft that you need to have the club leaning just slightly forward in order to hit this sweet spot. It's a small amount, but you should still have a slightly forward low point, which means your club will be traveling slightly down at impact, take a small divot, and slightly out through impact, which would cause just a slight draw. When you align the sweet spot of your hybrid to the ball, you'll notice that right in the middle of the face, you don't have to lean the shaft forward at all or lean the face forward at all to hit the sweet spot. So this is the first club in our set that we don't actually have to have any forward lean of the face or any forward shaft lean. So with hybrid, because we're not traveling much down or much out, or if at all, this is the first club that we swing that we should actually see a pretty straight shot. It doesn't mean you can't manipulate your swing to hit a draw or to hit a fade. It just means that the way the club is designed, when aligned to the sweet spot, should produce a straight shot. Finally, the driver. And I know we've skipped a few clubs along the way, but I think you can fill in the gaps and get a good idea of where the sweet spot is with every single club in your bag and adjust your alignment at address and at impact to ensure that you're hitting the sweet spot. When it comes to the driver, this is the first club in our bag that we're actually encouraged to tee the ball up a little bit. I think when you're starting out, it's a really good idea to just tee the ball high enough so that you can hit the dead center of your driver. That's where the sweet spot's going to be on most drivers, if not all. So that's a great place to start. Because we can adjust the height of the tee, we can move the ball up as high as the tee will allow, and that can actually encourage a situation where your club's traveling slightly upward at impact. That slightly upward impact alignment will also be affecting how your club's traveling through the arc through impact. So if your club is traveling slightly upward, the path will be encouraged to be a little bit out to in, and this will create left to right spin and a slight fade. This is why we see the best drivers of the ball hitting either a straight drive or a slight fade. Again, you can move the ball around in your stance and you can adjust the tee height if you want to play around with ball flights that fit your eye and that you like to see. But the way the club is designed, you can hit a pretty straight shot with your driver, or you could tee it a little higher, catch it a little bit more forward in your arc, and have a little bit of a fade. Someone recently asked me if I learned all of this information before I started playing golf or right when I started playing golf, I'd be a step ahead, right? My answer was, you'd be a mile ahead. Most golfers, when they learn golf, they start to ingrain the habit of an intentional upward angle of attack. So they're trying to get the ball in the air or hit the ball up. And that doesn't mesh with almost all of our clubs. So it's going to be really hard to learn to hit the ball consistently if we're not using the club the way it was designed. If you start as a new golfer understanding the sweet spot and how that affects your setup and your swing, you'll be miles ahead of everyone else and miles ahead in your golfing journey. Thanks for tuning in to 18 Birdies Golf 101, and happy golfing.